Hi everybody, it's Miss Patti from the Goffstown Public Library and welcome to Pie Crust Making 101. So today we are going to be making a delicious homemade pie crust from scratch. And the recipe that I'm using today is my grandfather's treasured secret recipe. And I have used this recipe so many times I can't even tell you, and it is basically a no-fail recipe. As you can see, I hope you can see, it's been well loved and well used because it's on a very stained index card. So the ingredients that you will need are 3 cups of flour, 1.5 cups of shortening, and this, for me anyway, is a combination of Crisco shortening, I use the butter flavor, and 1 stick of unsalted butter. 3/4 of a cup of cold, like ice cold water, a pinch of salt. So those are the ingredients, that's all you need, those 4 things, well 5. To make this crust recipe. And one of the most important things to always remember when you're making a pie crust from scratch is that all of your ingredients, the shortening, the Crisco shortening, the butter, and the flour, as well as the water, all need to be as cold as possible. So what I'm going to do is measure out 3 cups of flour into my bowl. And by the way, the larger size bowl that you can use is best, and you'll see why in a little bit when we're blending everything together. If the bowl is too deep or too narrow, it makes it harder to really mix everything up. So 1 cup, and I have to say I think I've gotten pretty good. I'm using the scoop method for getting the flour out of the canister. I'm pretty good at kind of shaking it, but if you have a butter knife at home, I'm going to use this giant chef's knife. You just cross the top of it to make sure you're getting exactly a cup. So that's 2 cups. And I shake it, and I honestly don't even think I need, maybe just a smidge there. 3 cups of flour. Okay, so that's it for the flour. Then you're going to take just a pinch. So I tend to just put it in my hand. I would say this is about 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and you mix that in there. And then you're going to take your fork, and you're just going to mix it up just a little bit so the salt goes in with the flour. Okay, now I'm going to take this flour, and I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes, but an hour is even better. So I'll do that, and then we'll be right back to continue. Okay, welcome back. I've now got my 3 cups of flour and my 1/4 teaspoon of salt, nice and cold, along with a cold stick of butter and a cold 1 cup of shortening. Actually, yeah, 1 cup of shortening. So the next step is to open everything up and unwrap it. And I really should have had a paring knife or even a butter knife to do what I'm about to do, but I forgot to bring that to the library today, so I'm using this giant chef's knife instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially take the knife and cut the shortening in half the long way, because I'm basically trying to get it into little cubes. It just makes it easier and quicker to blend with the flour. And then I'll go like this. And I'll use my fork to get it in there. So it doesn't have to be perfect by any means. You just don't want to put the giant clump of it in at one time. Okay, so that one, I'm just kind of spreading it around. Okay, so that's it with the Crisco. Fold that wrapper and put it to the side. Next, you're going to do the same thing with the butter. Now, technically, when you make pie crust, you could use all butter or you could use all shortening. I personally like the flavor a little bit better when it's a mix of both. But again, I use the butter flavored Crisco, not the white. All right, so cutting it down the center long ways. Actually, the butter is firmer than the shortening, so I cut this into little cubes. And again, technically you don't have to do that. Not the safest. But it'll make it easier when you get to the blending part. They're like little 1/2-inch cubes. Boom, boom. Homemade pie crust is so worth the effort, I think. Okay, so that's all done. Yay! Put that to the side. And now it's time to either use your fork, well, let me show you what this looks like too. So you can just see it's the butter and the Crisco laying on top essentially. I'm going to take my fork and I'm just going to sort of mix it, but I'm not blending it. Mixing it so everything has got a coating of flour on it. And now, again, you can use your fork to do this. I like using my pastry blender. So I'm taking this and I'm just pushing down. This is probably the most time-consuming part. Can you see that? So these little blades here are just mixing in, and you want to continue doing this until the pieces of shortening and butter and flour look a little bit like pea size. So I would say it takes about a minute, maybe a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And as I'm pushing down, I'm kind of like gently twisting. And of course, I washed my hands before I did this, and of course you will wash your hands before you do it at home, because I'm about to put my fingers in it and go like this to carefully wipe this off. There we go. There we go again. I clean my pastry blender maybe twice throughout the whole thing just to... So I hope you're starting to see how we're getting little pieces here. Again, I'm just gonna, because they get stuck in between those little blades. There. And if you were using a fork, you would just sort of be going like this. So in some ways it's good to use both. The pastry blender does a great job to get you started, but then if you have a few pieces that are bigger and you really want to break them up, you can be more purposeful with that. Okay, I think we're ready. Next step is to mix in the water. Here's the thing. Although the recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of ice water, I never pour all of the water in at one time. The best thing to do is to do it a couple tablespoons at a time. So I'm going to take my 1 tablespoon measuring spoon, and I'm going to do, actually I'll do about 3 tablespoons to start. So this is 2 and 3. And at this point, I'm done using this. So now I'm going to use my fork to start mixing that water in a little bit at a time, because if you put too much water in and it gets too sticky, then you'd have to add flour, and that will change the dynamic of the recipe. So clearly I need a little bit more. So again, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Oh, and by the way, this recipe makes enough pie crust for 2 9-inch pies. So a top and a bottom, or if you have 2 pies that just need a bottom crust, or pie that just needs a bottom crust, you can make 2. So either 1 2-crust pie or 2 1-crust. Okay, so you can see it's starting to get, but it's still not holding together. And we're down to about 1/3 of a cup from 3/4 of a cup of water. You can almost smell it cooking in the oven. And what happens is the shortening and the butter creates, when the crust is cooking, little pockets of flakiness. And that's what makes your pastry nice and flaky. Okay, so you can really see now it's starting to hold together. But I still think maybe 2 more tablespoons this time. Believe it or not, we are almost done. Should have done this earlier. Okay. So now I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to reach in and I'm going to push together. Can you see how it's all sticking together? And for the most part, I don't think I need any more water. So what I do is I make one giant, actually, you know what? I'm going to change that. I am going to do 1 more tablespoon. And honestly, we're just about at 3/4 of a cup. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to take this out of the ball, and I'm putting on, what I'm using today is a marble cutting board, which is perfect for pastries. It's made especially for pastries. When I'm at home though, sometimes I don't pull this out because I have my kitchen counter, but here at the library I just didn't want to throw it on one of our tables. So I make 1 big ball, and then you can use a butter knife or a chef knife or whatever. I use my little pie dough scraper and I try to find the center because I'm going to divide it evenly into 2. The other thing about making pie crust is pie crust can get tough really easy if you work with it for too long, so you want to blend it just until it's blended. You don't want to keep on going. Otherwise the crust will get tough and it won't taste as good. So that's 1. And then that's 2. Now, if you're really pressed for time and it's an emergency, you can roll it out right away. But really what you should do is wrap each piece of dough in something. I use wax paper and put it in the fridge and let it rest for about an hour before you roll it out. So I'll put this one in here, and you want to wrap it pretty tight so the air can't get into it. So that's 1. Also, just so you know, this pie crust recipe you can freeze at this point. So if you were making this, let's say you need a pie crust for Thanksgiving, but you didn't want to wait until the day you were making the pies, you could make them a week ahead of time, freeze them, then take them out of the freezer probably the day before you want to roll them out, and they would just be fine. So that's a little time-saving trick as well. So I'm going to now take these 2 pieces of pie dough, put them in the refrigerator, let them rest for an hour, and then I'll show you how to roll it out. Okay, welcome back. I've got my 2 chilled pieces of pie crust dough, and the fun is about to start because now we are going to roll them out and put them into our lovely pie pan. So I'm actually going to put one to the side because we're not going to use that one right now. I've washed my hands. Always make sure our hands are nice and clean and dry. Dry hands are important. And before I open the wrap, I am going to lightly dust my marble cutting board, pastry board with some flour. I love my little duster. So how this tool works is you squeeze it and it opens up. You stick it in your flour and then you let go and the flour gets sealed inside and you just a little bit squeeze it open and shake it. It's awesome. Love it. Okay, so now I'm gonna open up and discard the wax paper. Some people use saran wrap to wrap their pie crust. I have a love-hate relationship with saran wrap, so I prefer to use the wax paper. Okay, so what I do is I just use my hands and I'm gently pressing just a little bit. Again, you don't want to overwork the dough, so we're just going to use a little bit. There we go. And then this is my rolling pin. You might have a wooden one at home. This is a silicone one, so it helps it not to stick. So I'm going to gently go this way a little bit. Then you're going to turn it and actually flip it. different directions to the side. I'm going to lift it over here a little bit, add a little bit more flour so it doesn't stick to the board. Flip it over. And you're going to keep going till you have, it won't be a perfect circle, and that's okay. I'll show you why in a minute. But just roll it out. I don't know, it's probably going to be like a 1/4 inch. A good way to know that you're where you want to be is to take your pie pan and put it over the circle, because you want to have enough, not just to cover the bottom, but up over the side. So it looks to me like I might need to roll just a little bit more, but I'm going to flip it over. If you don't flip it over, what happens is it'll often stick. And pie crust is very forgiving, so you'll see in a minute when I put it into the pan, there'll be places where I'll have to pinch it and squeeze it together if it's not perfect. All right, I think I'm getting there. I'm just going to do one more. As we go. Okay. Now, the right way to fold the pie crust, well, you can just lift it up and put it in onto your plate. But a fun thing to do to make sure that the whole thing doesn't tear is to fold it in half, and then like that. There you go. Start in the middle of your pan and then unfold it and lift it out. Okay, so see how, you know, in different places there's more here than there is here. You can just pinch it together. So what you do with the overhang is you kind of fold it over like that. So I kind of could have, so here's where you have to play around a little bit. I could have rolled it out just a smidge more. But it's going to be fine. You'll see. We have lots of cookbooks here at the library about how to make delicious pies. So if you're looking for a recipe for a pie, please check out the library catalog for that. Okay, so now it's ready. Most cooks, chefs, would like to make the crust edges look pretty. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can use the tines on a fork to just press gently. And this is particularly helpful if like in this case, you don't have a lot of overhang. But another way to do it would be to take your thumb and your index finger on one hand and your index finger on the other and make a little design like that. So you just gently and quickly go all the way around. And when you're done, I like to put my pie crust back in the fridge just like this for 10 or 15 minutes. So it's nice and cold, because a soggy, warm crust will melt, believe it or not, in the oven and get runny. All right, so here I've already used the tines of the fork, but I could build it up with my fingers. See how, because it's a little bit thinner, it doesn't look as pretty. I can make it work. There you go. All right, and ta-da! You have a lovely homemade pie crust. Now some pie crusts have to be pre-baked in the oven before you put the filling in. So I have an awesome pumpkin pie recipe that I'm actually going to share with how many of you registered for this program beforehand. It's my grandmother's awesome pumpkin pie. It's delicious. You make the pie filling on the stovetop, and then you pre-bake the pie crust, and then you pour the filling in and just chill it. You don't even have to bake it in the oven. But some pies, like an apple pie for instance, you don't have to pre-bake the crust. At this point, I would just fill it with my apple filling and put, I'd roll out the other one just like I did the first, and I'd lay it on top and then do the crimping that I showed you. Or you can do a lattice top to the pie. So there's all different ways to do it. It's fun. But But making your own pie crust from scratch is so easy, and it's so delicious, and it's so much better for us than buying it at the store. Although I will admit that sometimes I cheat and I do buy it in the store if I'm crunched for time. That is it, my friends. I hope you have a lovely Thanksgiving celebration. November or Thanksgiving 2020 will be different than ones we've had in the past, but they will still be filled with delicious food and family. And we are grateful for you. Bye.